My guest tonight is Peter Klein. He's a member of Independent Media Solidarity, a loose affiliation of journalists and investigators. They are perhaps best known for their video on the Sandy Hook incident. He is also the host of Tyranny News Network. Peter, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Tim. Thank you. How are you doing?
Very good. That Sandy
Cool.
Hook video, what's the actual title of that again?
It's We Need to Talk
That's
About
it, yeah.
Sandy Hook. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just want to get that title in there. Yeah.
Thank-
So Peter, tonight you wanted to talk about a strange case, the strange case of Michael Cravey.
Yes, absolutely.
He was an associate or friend of yours.
Yeah, he was a fellow researcher,
Okay.
conspiracy theorist, YouTuber, all of these things.
And
And I guess I can start off with a little background on the
okay.
guy. And it might help to understand also that on YouTube, which is where he spent most of his time and how he kind of became known in the world of conspiracy theory, he went by the moniker of Thomas Brinkley. So, although his real name was Michael Cravey, and he became well known there on YouTube for producing videos that started before the Aurora Theater shooting, but that was really when he really picked it up and hit the ground running. Had a lot of great information about that, some good insight. He was a little controversial, but he was definitely prolific in the material he produced. And it was around that time that he contacted me, or I contacted him. I don't remember how it started, but we developed a friendship that way that turned into an actual collaboration on a few things. We did some conference type videos in which I would say Michael, myself, and another gentleman would kind of dissect Aurora. And that was actually the main, we would get into all kinds of topics, but Aurora was really the big one at the time. And he spent probably most of his time researching
No,
that case.
Aurora was the Batman shooting.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
the theater shooting, James Holmes.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of developments in that area as well, especially since that whole trial took place after Michael's death. So he wasn't able to see the outcome of that, which is sad because he really would have been interested in that for sure. But some of the other stuff he was interested in were, the Sikh temple shooting, which happened shortly after Aurora, 9/11, which I think a lot of us are interested in. So what had happened is this, just so to kind of bring people up to speed who maybe aren't familiar. Uh, he died on March 3rd, 2014. He was gunned down by the Gainesville Police Department in a shopping center. He began that day. How that day began apparently was he made his way from where he lived in Cross City at the time, which is about an hour west of Gainesville. He made his way from there to the Gainesville campus on, I believe it was the first day of break. So you can imagine it was pretty much a ghost town, and especially because it was just before 7 a.m. actually. And the story goes that he made contact with a couple, a middle-aged couple. The gentleman's name was Mike Preston. I don't recall the woman's name, but she was, I believe, his wife. And they were both employees of the university. And he was said to have begun attacking this gentleman, Mike Preston, and stabbed him a number of times. And there were a couple of witnesses claiming that he seemed to be enjoying it, like he was smiling, maybe even laughing, I believe, in one account. There were a couple of people that claimed to have witnessed it, and of course the wife as well. And then we also have the account given by Mr. Preston. And there's also footage of that, by the way. We have the first squad car that arrives on scene. That footage from that squad car is available. It was unusual in that it also was like some of these squad car clips we see that do not have the timestamp. Again, I don't know what the precedent is here and whether this is how it normally goes, but I was always under the impression that the timestamp was part of the evidence itself, really what kind of made the evidence sound and would hold up in court. I don't think the evidence does hold up in court without the timestamp, but at any rate, however they do it now, that's what was happening with that footage. He, after that stabbing incident, there was almost immediately, it began a car chase. There was a University of Gainesville uh, police squad car, or maybe someone who was off duty, one of the two, began a chase, and a couple of vehicles actually pulled up behind and were able to begin this chase to get. I guess at that point they had already got his license plate, so they were able to identify the vehicle, and I've actually seen some of the footage from that as well. So we have a scene where you see a squad car racing down one of the side streets there at the university, and he goes and the car makes a right turn, and then we see Michael's black Jeep Liberty, or what they say is his black Jeep Liberty. It does look like the vehicle coming down the street, but Michael actually slows down. It looks like maybe he's going 50, then he slows down to, I think probably it looks like about 20 miles an hour when he passes the squad car going the other way. And then the car makes a turn and picks up the chase from there. And then they hand off the chase to the general police department in Gainesville, and it gets out of hand. They abandon the chase. They call it off because they say it's getting too hairy and too dangerous for the general public, they claim. So later we find that the next time we kind of know anything about what happened is because, again, having called off the chase, they have lost contact with Michael, apparently. And the next thing we know, he's in drive-through, only less than 2 miles away. So at that point, the next time that there's any knowledge as to what was going on with Michael was probably almost a couple hours later. He is in the McDonald's drive-through line, and he gets a text message from his mother. Now, what has happened is, in the interim, they have a distant relative, a cousin or something, that is a police officer in a neighboring county, I believe, and that person just happened to have heard on the wire that they were in pursuit of a Michael Cravey. So they obviously knew who this person was and thought, well, I better notify the family. So they made contact with his mother, who was a school teacher. And so she was already in class. She wasn't able to make a call. So instead, what she did is she texted Michael, and he was in the drive-through line at McDonald's, and he gets this text, and it was something very generic, like, "How are you? What's going on?" Something like that. So he replies, "I'm fine. How are you?" That type of thing. Mm-hmm. And that was the end of that. I think maybe she intended to try to call him when she could at that point. But then he gets a call from one of his younger brothers, who immediately starts talking to him like someone who is assuming that Michael was aware of what was going on. So he was saying, "Why are you running? Why don't you just give yourself up?" That type of language. And Michael's response was, wait, I don't know what you're talking about. Go back. What's going on?" And then he begins to tell him, "Don't you know? I mean, you were in the car chase just now, right? And the police are after you. That's what we have evidence here. I saw it come across the wire. They're in pursuit of Michael Cravey." And then this is what is reported, not only in the police report, but also in the news, in a news article written about this in a local paper. It says that his next statements were, "They're setting me up. I need to figure this out." And then click, the phone goes dead. And he's not able to get a call in or out after that point. Well, at least that's the claim made by the brother and the family. The family had complained from beginning on that day for the next 2 or 3 days that they had intermittent cell phone ability. But so from that statement alone, it does raise the question as to whether Michael was actually involved in any stabbing that morning in the first place. So after that, we don't know, at least we didn't know for a long time until the official report came out. And even then, it's not clear why, but he apparently after this trip to McDonald's, and we know that he did go in, he did get some food, some breakfast, and something to, some orange juice, because that was found in his vehicle. But he then went from there to the local news station. And he went there, he walked up to the receptionist, and he asked if he could speak with Mike Potter, who was the local weatherman. And she says, well, do you have an appointment? And he says, no. And she says, well, I'm not sure if he's even here or if he'll be able to see you. So hold on. But right then, coming down the stairs or coming out of the, uh, the offices there is Mike Potter. So he just turns from that point and asks him, hey, Mike, do you mind if I talk to you for a moment? Can we step outside? And Mike Potter says, yes, sure. And they go outside. Michael asks him, uh, do you know why I'm here to talk to you right now? And Mike Potter says, no, not at all. And then he asks again, so you have no idea why I'm here to talk with you? And Mike Potter says, no, no idea whatsoever. And then Michael just turns without saying a word and walks away, assumingly, we assume presumably to his vehicle, where he then takes off from there. So again, we have this weird interaction where it seems like there's a difference of expectation here, where what Michael was expecting was that Mike Potter would know why he was there to see him. Now, why would he know that? Now, my interpretation of this, a long while later, it came to me that maybe what had happened is that somebody had contacted Michael and said, I'm Mike Potter. And you may know me from the local weather, that type of thing. And basically impersonated Mike Potter in order to invite Michael to meet him somewhere for some exchange of information or whatever. So as it turns out, Mike Potter, the real Mike Potter, had apparently no idea what this was all about. So Michael heads back into town. Now, some people speculate he attempted to leave town and go out via one of these alternate routes that would have kind of looped his way, a very indirect route, but intending to eventually arrive back at home in Cross City. And instead, he may have discovered as he was driving away on this kind of desolate route, because it would have been very low traffic, and he may have been one of the only vehicles on the road. Some people speculate he may have decided that that was a bad idea and turned and went back into the center of town, trying to find the more populated area in which to maybe just kind of save himself. Because I don't know what that point. I would imagine at that point he was pretty concerned that something was going on, and he may have been thinking, I'm being set up, as he had said to his brother. So then they resume the chase because somebody picks up, and I think Michael probably was aware of this because he began to accelerate and to drive a little erratically. But somebody saw the vehicle again in law enforcement, and a second chase ensued, and that ends in a crash where Michael, the vehicle, he hit another vehicle that apparently had nothing to do with this, and so these were innocent victims. There were no serious injuries, but it did total his vehicle and may have totaled the other vehicle. And he then leaves the vehicle and heads into a local the nearby shopping center. And in that shopping center, there's a Pier 1 we know of. There's a Best Buy, and there may have been a PetSmart as well, because he makes his way into as he's kind of making his way along the storefronts there, he goes in briefly to the Pier 1, comes right back out. He is said to then have gone a few stores down and gone into the PetSmart. He then goes into Best Buy. He has a couple interactions with people in vehicles nearby. Somebody said that he had approached their vehicle and asked where the local Verizon store was. So he was asking for information, and there was a Verizon store in a shopping center just further down the road, but there wasn't one in the center he was in. He then goes into Best Buy, and there's a witness that came on social media even at one point claiming to be an employee of Best Buy and saying that they observed him come in and he appeared to be hiding something under his shirt or under his jacket. And he came in and spent no more than 5 minutes. He walked around the store, and then when he left, that's when, by that time, the police had already been basically taking care of getting people out of the parking lot area there, and they were basically building up a presence so that they could deal with him when he came out of Best Buy. And a gentleman, a police lieutenant there named Shabula, I think his name's Michael Shabula, was the officer that engaged him, and they claimed that he said, put the hatchet down because he had at that point, they claim, a hatchet. And how he got this thing, I have no idea. If he had it with him the whole time, he would have had to have retrieved that from the crash of his vehicle, and maybe that's what they say he was hiding under his shirt or jacket. And he then apparently, according to their story told that day, charged them with the hatchet raised. So they unloaded the clip on him, I think 15 rounds, and 9 rounds made their way into Michael. And that's how he met his end. And then there was some attempt by the paramedics that arrived at the scene to revive him. They were pumping him pretty good. There's about a 15-second clip that I saw in which you see someone laying flat on their back and they're pumping him pretty vigorously. So it wasn't, and it did appear to be a real person and not a dummy or something. But, it's difficult to tell. It's certainly hard to tell if it's Michael. That's an almost impossible thing to determine from the footage, although the footage is fairly decent. It's just at the angle and, the situation, there's a lot of people nearby. So anyway, they tried to bring him back, I guess. And but, when you've got 9 bullets having gone into you, it's not very likely, especially since a couple of them hit some vital organs and maybe an artery or two. So it was pretty tough to imagine that being very effective. And they then say he died at the hospital there, the nearby hospital. So that's how he met his death on March 3rd, 2014. So a very interesting story and a lot of details and a lot of just bizarre stuff that you would not expect to find even in a story involving a car chase, that type of thing. They usually don't involve this many weird elements, like visiting the weatherman.
Yeah.
You can imagine how that. So for a conspiracy theorist, there are just a bevy of angles of approach here.
Well, have they ever tried to explain his motive for the alleged stabbing, other than just
No,
a mad attack?
no, not at all.
And the stabbing wasn't done with a hatchet, I presume, at the university.
That's right. And in fact, the weapon I think was described briefly, but there was nothing. No attempt to describe or to go into, as far as I could tell, I did obtain the official Gainesville police report, and I also had the Gainesville University PD report earlier, quite a bit earlier than that. And in neither do they account for the weapon, like was it his, where did it come from, that type of thing. And what happened to the weapon, I don't believe that they describe how it was recovered. Or if it was recovered. So I don't know many details there. Now, there's another point here regarding the evidence that was left behind or not left behind. He had an iPhone, I think version 5 iPhone, and this was how, in fact, he took the text and received the phone call from his brother. That iPhone was not recovered from either scene, but they did claim to have recovered a flip phone, some kind of a Samsung phone that they said was his. However, I don't know I can't recall if they went into the details of what the number of the phone was. I don't think they did, but there was no reference to the iPhone that he did have, and people knew that he had, that they did not recover. Now, just as a side note, somebody put on Craigslist a very brief advertisement for a lost recovering. They have recovered somebody's phone, an iPhone version 5. They didn't describe many of the details of the phone and did not mention who the phone belonged to, and it may not have been something they could determine. I'm not sure how that works. But it was recovered on the Gainesville campus, and it was around, not too long after this event on March 3rd of 2014. So I replied to them very carefully. I actually had a couple people look at the reply I had put together, because basically what I was asking these people to do was to first verify if this was Michael's phone in any way, if possible, and if it was not, to possibly, if they haven't heard from anyone else to claim the phone, to send it to me, but whatever they do not contact law enforcement. So you can imagine how difficult and how delicate I had to craft the wording in order to, hopefully not just spook them. But I sent them 2 messages, but they never did reply to either one.
And now the ad is gone?
When it went away, there were no, as far as I know, it's impossible to tell on Craigslist if an item has been sold or if an item's recovered or claimed or whatever. It just kind of fades away. And it's up to them to decide whether, the person who's leaving the ad, if they want to reply to anybody or if they want to withdraw the ad. And I don't think it was withdrawn for a while, and it probably just expired after whatever the normal time frame is of 30 days or something. So, that was a kind of a dead lead, but it appeared as if there was a possibility there that was it. And the brother, one of his other younger brothers, came out and actually put up a video on YouTube very briefly, 2 short videos they appear to be from the same day or evening. He films himself basically asking for help in trying to figure out some of these details. And, of course, my attempts to reach out to him, though, were completely met with nothing. He never replied to any of my attempts, and no one ever, and I know he's seen my materials. I've got a lot of content out there on this very issue, and I've been very straightforward, and I've never made any accusations. I've been very open-ended about this because I don't, in fact, know. I don't have any proof that anybody in particular was involved in this. We know some of the facts, and one of the facts is that this is his brother, and he puts up a video asking for help. But one of the items, one of the points he makes is that he was able to log in to Michael's account with his phone account on this iPhone he had. And he says that he was able to, I believe for 11 days, he was able to determine that it was still able to be pinged. Whatever that means. I'm assuming that just means that the phone is still turned on, or rather it still has some battery life in it. And I don't know if 11 days is normal. It seems a little excessive, but he said that it was still returning a signal or a ping after 11 days, according to the online account management system there, which I'm not too familiar with how those would work, but that's an interesting point to make about that.
But the authorities haven't shown any interest in this missing cell phone?
No. The authorities had no interest whatsoever. But you can imagine that doesn't surprise me, because they had a case that was pretty much wrapped up. A guy went crazy, and he was a conspiracy theorist online that went nuts and, decided he would just go on a rampage. And it turned into this. I mean, he had a hatchet. There were all these elements that certainly made it seem as if he had lost his mind. Now, one of the points to make, I would say, that's important to understand is that everyone that knew him directly. My personal opinion of him is that he was he was a person of sound mind. He was very nonviolent, right? He was kind of an intellectual person. He understood the world was a little bit, there is such a thing as corruption, and it's pretty rampant. And so all of that he'd already come to terms with, I think, and that's what motivated a lot of his work. So, and he did, now this is, one of the things that needs to be looked at is Michael's situation in life in general, and basically what he was saying and doing and his activities leading up to this event. And one thing to note is that about a year prior to this event, his dad had a really horrible stroke and left him virtually paralyzed, unable to speak, all of that type of thing. So what happens is shortly after that time, Michael winds, now he never mentioned this to me at all, never once, during the time that I was communicating with him, both, through the web, or online rather, and then also on the phone, because I'm in Kentucky, he's in Florida. But he never mentioned it. His dad had this stroke, and sometime shortly thereafter, Michael moves back home. So he now is moving from Gainesville where he had an apartment, to move back home to help with his father's recovery and recuperation, some of the physical therapy stuff. And he helps his dad in this way for about 6 months, but his dad eventually dies. And so there was apparently no, this 6 months of work with his dad was all for naught. And I don't personally know if there was ever any signs of hope there, or if he just descended, if it just got worse and worse. So he eventually did die. It was about 6 months prior to this event, or prior to March 3rd. Now, also in the time frame leading up in the 6 months or so, or a few months at least, before Michael's this March 3rd event in which he was killed, he had suspicions of being watched. And he would talk to people about this. He also had a couple of videos he put up on YouTube in which he described some of this type of behavior, or some of these activities, or just these oddities in his day-to-day life that he thought were weird. One of these was where he was working at a restaurant or a retail place, I can't recall which, but at one point in time, he says that he's working he's in the back room, or let's say in the kitchen if it's a restaurant. So in other words, it's off limits to the public where he's at work. And somebody just walked right in and apparently struck up a conversation with somebody there in which they appeared to not know who this person was. And they looked at Michael in a weird way. And Michael thought it was totally unusual. Like this person walked right back there like it was their business, but apparently they had no business being back there. And he got a weird feeling about that. So that was an example of the type of thing that he would describe was going on, and he thought was a little odd. Now, it got a little more intense when, for instance, he was suspicious that people in his even before actually he moved to in with his parents, he had spoken a couple times of there being some unusual people moving in as neighbors in nearby apartments to him, and that their behavior was odd, that they seemed to be focused on him in some way. Now, I know from experience in dealing with certain people and their stories, and I've had a couple of personal friends that have had issues with mental illness of various kinds. I don't buy into the standard, the official psychological profiles and all of these various labels they put on people. So I won't say that I abide or understand or support all of those, but I understand when somebody's got some kind of a mental issue.
Yeah, mental illness is a problematic construct.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's applying the medical model to things that there are no objective tests for. And so,
absolutely,
yeah, so
absolutely.
It's a sliding scale, so it can be used in various ways. Historically, it's been used as a political weapon to go after dissidents and other problem people. So.
Absolutely, yeah. It becomes if it's convenient for them to be mentally ill, it's also sometimes what determines whether someone's mentally ill. Mm-hmm. So it was something I was familiar with, but so I was always kind of like, when I would talk to Michael and he would talk about this type of stuff, I would hear him out, and then I would give him the whole point, I think, of any kind of conversation into this type of stuff. If someone's explaining this is what they suspect is going on, the point is to get to your assessment and whether or not you feel that they're, are they really, are they going crazy, or is this stuff really going on? Are they being gang stalked, or whatever the terms would be, whatever the phenomenon is, somebody watching them? And so I would always give him that, I would always explain that, well, it does sound unusual, and I have to admit that there's a possibility there. But I also I kept advising him that, look, you got to whatever you do, don't fall into the trap that you fall into with mental illness. This happens so easily. The further you get into certain forms of mental illness, the more you become the center of the world. And so that makes it so much easier to imagine that everyone's interactions, everyone's activities out there are somehow related to you in a way. So you have to be cautious and stay away from that if possible. So I would never be able to give him a real solid confirmation or just tell him that he was losing his mind. But he would actually be the one that would suggest that he may be losing his mind. He would say, he goes, this may be a simple case of paranoid narcissism. So he was really aware.
Isn't that the catch-22 there?
Well, it's the thing. The point is that the guy was aware of this possibility, and
Yeah.
so he was suggesting it more so than I. So it always was kind of a way to really temper this information, and it made it seem like, I was less concerned about any of it because I thought, well, if anything, the guy's aware
Yeah.
of this type of thing, so he's not going to, just interpret everything through this certain lens that somebody with mental illness would. And if he was leaning that way, he at least had awareness of this type of thing.
I'm just suggesting here that given his activism and his avocation
Mm-hmm.
in activism, that he might have caught the attention of somebody,
Well, yes,
some black op or something, and
sure.
and one method they might have is to harass someone in a way that it's gaslighting.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
can gaslight entire societies. So 9/11
Well,
was. But I'm saying, you can go out, you can target an individual and do things to them, whether it's rearranging their stuff in their house or just give them hints that they are being watched and knowing their vulnerabilities. And of course, with social media, I'm going to get this further, is someone's habits and taste and predilections and vulnerabilities are there for anyone who can access the data, and that your
yeah,
vulnerabilities can be targeted. And I suspect the people that are doing this, it's psychological warfare, and you'd be naive to think that whole branches or whole sub-branches of the military intelligence agencies aren't devoted to this type of operation, where they could pinpoint vulnerability and sort of push certain buttons.
absolutely.
You know,
That's all very possible. And this is stuff this is also stuff that Michael was aware of.
hmm
So he was very familiar with that type of activity, and also was able to speculate on what might actually be going on. Because of course we don't always get the whole picture; we get just little snippets, and some of it is pretty obvious, whereas other stuff is less so. And in fact, I've just to I got people coming to me all the time because of the work I do, because of my presence in social media, especially through my YouTube channel. I get folks contacting me, telling me stories about this and that, similar stories to what some of the things he was describing. But in some cases, it seems more clear to me that these people are probably, not. Well, they're probably either, leaning toward having a mental illness of
hmm
some kind, or they're just completely, they're not educated in this type of area, so they don't understand that, this is the kind of, like, for instance, with myself, I've heard so many of these types of stories. Some of them seem to be legitimate, where others seem to be just misinterpretation of the data. So I have to kind of be as objective as I can be here. And I've seen both sides of this. And in some cases, it seems like there's some legitimacy to it. And but even then, it's difficult to know because it's always, they've got the authority have that secrecy cloak. They can always just lower down over everything, and it makes it difficult to
hmm
confirm any of it. But so, one of the things though where it got a little odd with Michael, where I think there's no doubt, and I actually did a short video based on what he had done, and this was after his death, but it was a short time after. But in this video, he says, "I am being cordoned off on social media," and he says, for instance, for the first time ever, I attempted to log into my Twitter account on my mobile phone, which I have never done before. He'd always done that via his desktop or laptop for Twitter. And so he goes to log in for the first time and he sees a bunch of tweets from someone that is not him. In fact, he notices when he's logged in that the account, the avatar, is some girl on a motorcycle. And he looks at some of the tweets, and the tweets are about some just, like very, nonsense tweets about Housewives of Beverly Hills or whatever the show was at the time, the flavor of the month. But it was nothing specific, nothing interesting, nothing that seemed to relate to him in any way. But he was, and he says, he goes, look, and I was thinking this as soon as he said this, I thought, yeah, if you're logged in to a Twitter account, then that's probably your account. I find it very unlikely that somehow he would have crossed wires and been able to log into someone else's account. And he confirmed the ID. There's the name that you present, and there's also the underlying ID, whether it was, T Brinkley or M Cravey 503, whatever it might have been. He confirmed that it was correct. And he also said that another thing was happening was there was some guy who was complaining to him, I think, via his Facebook page. Or no, I'm sorry, it was I think it may have been via Twitter, one of the two, where he was saying, hey, stop messaging me, bro. Like he had this, and this was a few instances of this, where this one particular gentleman was complaining that he was not appreciating some of these messages that he was getting. I guess they may have been text messages, I think, actually, now that I think about it, because the way the guy seemed to be like feeling that he was targeted by these. And Michael, of course, said he had no idea what the guy was talking about. And then as he's filming this video, he's looking down at his phone because he's actually held up his phone and showed the information he was describing. And he says, oh, here he is again. Yeah, he's real angry. Yeah, he's angry at me for tweeting him or texting him, and I have no idea what he's talking about. So there again, there was evidence that it was happening live on the spot, which is very unusual. And it does seem to me that there may have been a hijacking of his Twitter account that took place.
This is why social media evidence isn't really evidence, because there's no chain of custody evidence here, and the fact that these systems are completely vulnerable to those with the resources to, have administrative access or backdoor access. They can obviously be hijacked and taken over. But you can, through social media, you can create a history there, and set someone up with, quote, scare quotes, evidence. But it's totally virtual. It's not physical evidence. It's just,
It is difficult.
And it's increasingly cited in the media whenever one of these incidents of shootings, social media, whether it's a blog with a manifesto or tweets or something. Well, these things can simply, if you have backdoor access to these things, you just go on and sign on as someone else's avatar and write whatever you want. So,
Yeah. Well, and what's unusual again in this case is that the avatar used for those particular tweets was not even his. Mm-hmm. So it had actually, but here's what he was getting at. What he was saying is only communicate with me through my Facebook account at this point in time. So in other words, he was saying avoid Twitter, avoid email, avoid comments on my YouTube channel, communicate just through Facebook. And he says that's the one I'll focus on. So I think he was trying to keep an eye on that as best he could and determine. And as I understand it, there is this possibility that some effort is underway, or there have been projects where individuals, what they see on the internet, regardless of where it's at, whether it be Facebook or just the web in general, various blogs they may visit, that what they see may be tailored to them specifically. And there's a term used to describe this. I can't recall right now what it is, but anyway, it was like a undernet, or anyway, the point was that there was this possibility. Somebody theorized this, and it began to sink in with me that, that could be the case. So in other words, what I would see when I went to his feed of his Twitter feed may not have included those, but what he was seeing did include them, or what certain individuals were seeing. So it's kind of like we never know for sure, just, kind of following your line of thinking. We're not ever certain when we're looking at some of these, zeros and ones broadcast across the internet, whether we're seeing the same thing everyone else is seeing. Very scary reality there if that were in fact the case, because they could really kind of, dictate it's kind of like going to your own personal Wikipedia designed to give you a view of the world or of certain things that's different than the reality or what other people are seeing.
It's
Very
the
scary.
hazard of relying on virtual reality
Hmm.
for your reality, as opposed to actually partaking in the world and you know getting
Sure.
involved in the 3D world and walking outside, touching things, and having some sort of real interaction with it. But as we get more you know addicted to our slave devices and this way of communicating, we are much more easily subjected to this type of engineering or propaganda or manipulation. And it's
Hmm.
all ones and zeros, so they can do it on the cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but think how this affects a group like my group IMS. We're very we're not centrally located geographically. We're
Mhm.
spread out all over. We're in various countries, mostly here in the US and Canada, but we're also in other countries and we're spread out here even in the US. So when we interact, it's via the web, via these tools that are provided for
Mhm.
us. So we have no, we're not, I wouldn't say we would fit the mold of someone who is kind of falling into the trap of virtual reality as just a general adjustment to the way they do things. It's more or less for us. It's about just this is the way in which we have to communicate, unless we really go out of our way to let's kind of switch to just email, and then
Mhm.
even doing that, we probably have to do it using secure keys and trying to be as secure about that as possible. But yeah, so it could impact us, and we have, it's just kind of it's a requirement for us to be able to communicate in this way. So if they were to try to switch things around and hide certain things and show other things, it would be very damaging. It would really inhibit our ability to get work done. So, and it's also why I've also originally, when I heard about Google's efforts and others to digitize all books, I thought, well, that's a great idea. Then occurred to me that, wow, that would mean that they may be able to go and just change something in a book and have it propagate across the internet, and we'd never know.
Yeah, if it's not physical, it's like at least with book burning, you have to physically have to burn the books. Where
Yeah,
they can
yeah,
wipe them
exactly.
clean. And I think Richard
That's right.
Grove of Tragiope has commented it's interesting that the name of one of the most popular ebooks that back there is called Kindle. And
Oh,
what
yeah.
is kindling used for?
Boy, that is
Fire.
interesting. I never
So,
thought about that.
um, but
I just think,
it's convenient. I mean, I use those devices. I own a Nook and a Kindle myself, and it is a great way to get hold of books for cheap and PDFs and these things. But you have to be mindful that there is no substitute for a physical book. I still enjoy books. It's just that they're expensive and they take up space. But
yeah.
you know,
Well, I'd be concerned about it. I think
yeah,
it's whether you use these, it's just good to know that there is a physical copy somewhere.
yeah, that you can repair to if necessary, and
Exactly, exactly.
you know,
So, at any rate, getting back to Michael's state of mind and some of his activities in the time, he did appear to be sinking into a depression in the few months that led up to this event. Now, I would not say personally that it would. It didn't seem to me that it was an obvious case of him losing his mind or becoming psychotic or something, but I'm not ruling it out. I mean, there's that
mhm.
possibility. But then again, what would account for the events of that day? Now, in one instance, in one of the reports, I'm not going to recall which report it was. I just remember, though, that in one instance, when they mentioned that he had gone to speak with the weather guy in one of these reports in the local news, I believe there, it followed that they made the claim that Michael believed that the government was controlling the weather through satellites, which I thought was a really nasty thing to say because it really was just something they invented to tie into this activity, or maybe to cover up whatever was really going on there. If there was anything to be found or anything to that story, I would think that there is. I doubt very seriously, having known Michael, that he went to go talk to the local weatherman about anything to do with weather modification and so forth. That seems like a real stretch, but it's not one that they were afraid to make in the local news there.
But he does
It's
appear to be lured lured to the station.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
seems to me. I mean, from the evidence. I would say, yeah. Otherwise, and to be honest, the way I think this may have gone down is that Michael was told by this Mike Potter impersonator potentially to meet me wherever, somewhere in Gainesville, at a certain time, and I think he went there and waited. And I think this Mike Potter guy didn't show up. So after a period of time, Michael decided, well, I'll get a bite to eat. And then after that, I will go see if I can track this guy down. Maybe he went to call him and couldn't get him on the phone, and so he went to the news station directly to see if he could find him there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's maybe what led to that conversation, because it certainly seems as if the feeling that Michael had was that Mike Potter doesn't seem to know me. He may have seemed not aware of why I would be here to talk to him.
Yeah.
So that's, hence these questions about, do you know why I'm here? So, and of course, he didn't seem to want to know anything other than, do you know why I'm here to see you? So it wasn't as if Michael was looking to obtain information from Mike Potter, whether he knew he was going to be there or, why Michael was there or not seemed to be really all that mattered at that point. So it must have been the onus was then on Mike Potter. What did Mike Potter appear or claim to have to present to Michael? And who knows? And I'm speculating here. I have no idea whether that happened or not, but it seems like you have to be out of your mind insane to go to have this, to be inventing this notion that the weatherman wants to talk to me about something.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently he did, or at least somebody portraying, impersonating Mike Potter. So anyway, and Mike Potter, by the way, made the statement that he didn't feel threatened by Michael. That was another point in his testimony. So
I'm sorry, chronologically speaking, this is after the attacks on the campus?
Yes, the attacks on the campus were really the very first thing that happened that day, technically, in terms of what the problems with law enforcement and all of that. That's what alerted them.
And Mike Potter didn't claim to have noticed any blood on him or anything like that?
No, and like I say, he did not feel threatened by Michael. Mm-hmm. So, and I would imagine if Michael had any visible blood on him, that he probably would have. It would have been a threatening thing. Would you step outside with me, please? Don't mind that I'm covered in blood or something.
And he had no history of any violence or anything, criminal record or anything, nothing at all. So
no, nothing at all. So this came out of nowhere. Now, here's the thing that is interesting too: the news media. Now, there was the local paper there had begun to run reports about this. The first report they had was only a couple hours after the stabbing incident, but this was before the conclusion of the event, which happened hours later. I think as late as 1 o'clock or something, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be, but I believe it was. So that was a number of hours that transpired. But so only a couple hours after the initial stabbing at around 7 a.m., just prior to 7, the news runs a report online, of course, and the online report it's incredibly in-depth, and it tells of, now Michael had a problem because he had been one of the members of a couple of we could call him James Holmes is innocent type groups on Facebook. So he was a member, at least. I don't think he was an administrator, but a member at a couple of these, the more prominent ones. And he began to suspect that one of the admins, of which there were only 2 or 3, I think, one of the admins of one of these sites was a shill, as he would put it, like maybe an involved party or somebody who was hired to kind of keep tabs on things. And why he came to that conclusion, I don't know. But he was a pretty savvy guy. So to my way of thinking, he probably had some pretty good evidence about that. So he posted a few comments and sent some emails or messages to individuals in this group, just notifying them that, look, and they canned him. They had already banned him or blocked him from the group, removed him in whatever way they do. He went and made some announcements to various people. And this triggered this woman, whose first name is Missy, I believe. some interactions between himself and Missy. Now, everything I've ever seen from Michael appeared to be on the up and up. There was nothing threatening. There was nothing, nothing that would have given me the impression that he had any ill intent. I think he was just trying to spread the word and make other people aware that, look, this group may be compromised. So, but that led to some interactions, and eventually one of the two, I believe Missy, took out a restraining order on him. So this was, I guess, you could consider this to be the first kind of law enforcement issue, really, with him, other than maybe a speeding ticket or something prior to that. And in the end, as it turns out, she did not appear at the hearing, I believe, but he did. So then she was then ordered to appear at the next one in order for them to proceed, I believe. And what had happened is, in between that time, he filed a counterclaim or something, and I never saw any of this information, but I do believe that he had filed this counterclaim, and she didn't show up at either the hearing for this counterclaim, or if it was the same hearing, she didn't show up for that one, which would have been the second attempt to have a hearing on her restraining order, so nothing ever went forward. And then what Michael did after that was he actually withdrew it because he began, and this was a statement he made to his girlfriend, whom I have spoken to a number of times. She said that he felt sorry for her, like he was not concerned that he was wrong about it, but he didn't know what her real involvement was. So he felt like, I just don't want to make things any worse for her, so I'll just withdraw my counterclaim to, I guess it was, again, the restraining order. So at any rate, that's how that ended. But what happened is that in this news report that was put out within just a couple hours of this first incident at 7 a.m., the news report made the connection between Michael Cravey, right, which is the person that came back when they ran the license plate, and Thomas Brinkley on YouTube. Now, that is a big jump to make, because how in the world are you supposed to know that? How would law enforcement have in their system any connection between this, because it was an anonymous account, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how they do that, but that's what they found.
Suggest some sort of, I guess, well, you and I both understand, obviously, surveillance being done without any probable cause.
It could have been that, or the story has some details in it that relate to a woman who is described as being a middle-aged woman who had interactions with Michael online, and that had claimed that he had threatened her and all of this stuff. And it was pretty clear from the storyline that they were talking about is this, they were referring to this Missy person. Now, how they knew to get in touch with her, I do not know. How would she have known that this incident was going on, and from there been inspired to or felt compelled to contact the news agency? And then how would she have then made contact with the person writing the story? See, it's just very unlikely.
Is this the time frame? Is this like the day after?
No, this is the same day, within just a couple hours of the first incident. Well, 7 a.m. So like at 9 a.m., they've got a story hitting their online edition about Michael Cravey, who is known as Thomas Brinkley and the conspiracy theorist on YouTube.
Without any investigation, they have all this information lined, all the ducks lined up. It would suggest that maybe they were trying to establish some sort of paper trail to make it seem like he had violent, inclinations.
It does seem that way, like they were portraying him in this way. If that was, well, there was a lot of details, though. There was so much detail provided, and a lot of details about the event itself, that initial encounter, this stabbing, supposedly. Although they did not, I don't think in that first version, they went identified who the victim was and his wife and all that. But
was there an actual stabbing?
Well, here's the other thing. That apparently is, according to official records and everything that we're reading about in these reports and the news reporting online, it is a case of somebody having stabbed, and they claim it was Michael Cravey, having stabbed this Mike Preston. However, as I mentioned before, I saw footage from the squad car that first pulled up at the scene after this, and I would guess it was within 10 minutes of him departing to begin this car chase from the university right there. So it was just a little after 7 a.m. after the stabbing. The car pulls up. You can see it's very clear footage. The gentleman is already laying down on the sidewalk there. And there's a woman that's kind of walking nearby with her hands on her face as she's kind of aghast or appears to be kind of shocked. And there's another gentleman there standing by. But the gentleman who's laying there on the sidewalk does not appear to be injured. He does not appear to have any stab wounds. He is not leaving any blood on the sidewalk underneath him. So that's the problem. To me, even if now I can understand that there are some superficial type wounds you can get when you are fighting off someone in a stabbing situation. If he doesn't really stab him very deeply or hit him in any really serious way, and apparently the guy recovered very quickly for the most part. I think he was gone. He was out of the hospital in just a day or two.
And grazing wounds or something. Yeah.
Sure, I could see that being the case, but it really does a lot of. It doesn't bode well for the official story to see this guy and not see any visible wounds on him. So that's another thing that's a little interesting.
And they are employees of the university.
And they're both employees of the university, yeah. And another point is the stabbing victim, Mike Preston. I believe he was the head of information systems there at the university, if I'm not mistaken, which is, I don't know what to make of that. I think there are more details about him that were revealed in that on that particular forum that was taken offline a short time after I came across it, which was months after this event. However, I don't see anything there in particular. However, he was an employee of the university, as was his wife. And as it turns out in the story, as the story kind of further develops and over the couple of weeks after, where they got a little more detailed and they identified him, identified a little more about that scene of the stabbing itself, and of course the rest of these details. They have revealed that this Mike Preston character was known in the community as a great guy, and he was what's known as a baby cuddler. You know what that is that on holidays like Christmas or other holidays, he would go into the pediatric intensive care ward and cuddle with babies. So, I mean, which sounds great. I mean, that sounds like, hey, that's a really nice thing. But it really, really, really seemed a little unusually, for him to be the baby cuddler. It just makes it appear as if maybe this was an element of the story that would have, if in fact they just invented this whole thing and it was all part of an operation, let's say, it sure would have been real easy to take the heat off of this guy and to remove any suspicion of his involvement by describing him as a baby cuddler, right?
So information system. So he has background in computers?
Yes. It was all IT
stuff. And of course, he's complaining about his accounts being hacked.
Yeah. So there is some interconnections there.
Are there any at the universities? What was Michael's relationship to the university?
He was a former student there.
Former student.
He hadn't been going there in about a year, I believe, at that time.
Okay. Are there any programs at the university that are suspect? I know that historically, military intelligence have had a very checkered and dark history with universities with all types of mind control and psychological warfare operations. Anything at the university there?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of interesting connections. I think Florida, in particular, is one of the states in which there are, military intelligence operations going on at a greater level than you'll find in many states. Another state, obviously, other states to look at for this would be California, Arizona, Colorado, but in particular in Florida, at that university, there's the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at the University of Florida, Gainesville, an aerospace connection. And aerospace is oftentimes that it's kind of the subset of the military industrial complex in which a lot of this type of work takes place. In fact, you'll find even the Air Force involved in fact, I believe it was the Air Force that was putting out the requisition for a social media integration application in which one individual would be able to simulate or act under a number of, up to 10 separate identities. Obviously, this would be a tool used for shilling on the internet. So that was something that I found interesting, but that was the Air Force of all people. And another one would be the Air Force Research Laboratory Munitions Directorate at Elgin Air Force Base nearby. Would be another one to look at. And in fact, one of the programs I was able to get, I don't recall the name of, but one of the statements I have here that was that described the purpose of this individual program, which was funded by the National Institutes of Science, and which is not unusual because they give out literally, I think, over $1 trillion a year in grants for various scientific and medical research and the like. And it says here that the purpose was internet forum-based research and manipulation of forum members and users using algorithms that crunch the data of all previous posts and interactions. So I think that's a pretty clear tie-in here potentially, but that was related to that Air Force Research Laboratory Munitions Directorate at Elgin, nearby though.
So Michael's work in conspiracy theory, researching these things, whether it's the Aurora shooting, 9/11, could have made him a fat target for these folks.
It could have. Yeah. It absolutely could have. And I want to say, I'll just kind of, to give you an idea of what I think might have been what got him on the radar, were two factors here. First was involving the Aurora Theater shooting. Now, regardless of what anyone thinks about this, there's a possibility that the Aurora Theater shooting was either part of an operation, could have even been totally contrived. It seems to have involved this James Holmes character, but maybe unwittingly. So we're not so certain about even though the case is all wrapped up and he's been sentenced to life in prison and all of that, we really don't absolutely know. And I've had suspicions since day one, and it's true that many conspiracy theorists, including Michael, had issues with this event. So over the months after that event, he had told me, without telling me who they were, he said he thought that he knew pretty certainly who the two shooters were in actuality at the Aurora scene, and that neither of them were James Holmes, and that the only other thing he mentioned a few things, but one that was key was that they both posed as victims, and they were both men. So something to think about there. And I think after looking at it, I see a lot of reason to suspect that he was right about that. And then, again, this goes very much against the official line, because after that trial in which James Holmes implicates himself in so many ways, it seems almost impossible to imagine that he wasn't involved directly. Was he? And was he one of the shooters? And were there more than one shooter? And that's what we have to look at. And I personally believe that Michael was probably right in his assessment. And there are a few other people that have come to this conclusion as well. And when we've identified who these individuals are, but I don't want to mention who they are. So that's one reason why he may have become a thorn in their side. Because he continued to do things that we didn't know about. Like another thing I didn't know about was around the same time after the Benghazi incident, he decides, because in Gainesville is located the famous Koran burning pastor Terry Jones. So he just decides he's going to pick up his gear and get in the car and drive and visit this church to speak with Terry Jones.
Is this the Westboro Baptist Church?
No, that's a different one, but I know who you're talking about. No, those are the God hates fags people.
Okay.
This is a different church.
Another asset. Okay, yeah.
There were, and the church is totally defunct.
Yeah.
At this point, but there were only like 20 members of this church at the time, so it wasn't like a real big thing. But he decides that he's going to go visit with Terry Jones, so he films himself pulling into this, like what looks more like a compound than a church. It's just like up a dirt road and everything. And he pulls in and he sees some people walking around. They have like walkie-talkies on. Then he gets to the door and he knocks and he pulls back and waits for the door to be opened. And a woman begins to speak with him. And the woman has a an Australian, I believe, accent, but it may have she may have been British or something else, but or even South African or something. But it sounds Australian to me. But she speaks with him briefly and says that Terry, Pastor Jones is not there that day. But Michael apparently makes a good impression with her at the time and didn't seem threatening. But he says he just wanted to ask some questions. And he said, "Look, I'm going to tell it like it is. I have my own ideas, but I want to get Pastor Jones's answers to some of these questions and get his side of the story." So I don't know exactly what he was looking to find or what his questions would have been had he met with him. But what's interesting is then the next day he follows up and calls back. Apparently the woman had said to call back, so he did, and he films this as well. And during this interaction, he doesn't speak with Terry Jones. He speaks with the woman again, and the woman just totally opens up and blabs virtually endlessly. So it's like a 40-minute call or something. And the whole time he's trying to interrupt her basically to get to can we just get to the point where, we can schedule something with Terry Jones? And that never happens. And she leaves it open ended again and claims to, I'll look into it and see what we can do, see if he's agreeable to it. But she reveals some really amazingly, well, it seems as if she was maybe talking too much. Now, what then happens is if you look at the connections between Terry Jones and the Benghazi event, I recommend if you haven't seen what they've called the Innocence of Muslims film, which was a film purported to be put up on YouTube that incited a riot in the Benghazi area leading to this event in Benghazi, in which the local ambassador there had been brutally murdered and all of that. Well, that was not true. I mean, it seems almost an impossibility to imagine that was going on. And in fact, it seemed more like an operation was underway in Benghazi. And I don't claim to know what was happening there. There are a lot of different ideas, and I'm not 100% sure that any of them is even hitting on exactly what was going on. There was a lot of weapons passing through that area, of course, because we've got, the issue of, Al Qaeda supposedly, then ISIS and ISIL, and we had the issue with the toppling of the regime, as they would say, in Egypt, also in Libya, and then ongoing issues with Syria. So weapons were kind of being passed around, and who knows who was facilitating this, what role who individuals there may have played. So what I think happened, though, is Michael was just digging in the wrong area. And later on, we come to find out that I did a very lengthy article that wound up going up on Memory Hole blog, which is Professor James Tracy's blog. I did a lengthy article there that tied in Terry Jones to Benghazi and explained a little bit about why it was that whatever had happened after Benghazi was a massive cover-up, and the whole blaming of this innocence of Muslims, which again I recommend. You can find it on the web. You really need to look at it. It's not a full movie. It's only 15 or so minutes because it was just a preview, and some speculate whether the movie even exists. But it's really hysterical. It's a really funny. I can't even describe it. You just have to see it thrown at us. It's wonderfully done, I have to say. Have you seen it personally, Tim?
A little bits of it. I remember it came out supposedly. Again, it started the Arab Spring or sparked the rebellion.
Yeah.
And at the time, my impression was it was put up there as a piece of, again, just to provide the pretext or an excuse for what was going on in Egypt.
Yes, one of the major sources, like where when you follow the path, and I dug through the news reports, and I did it chronologically. I was looking very carefully to find what was happening and when and who said what and what were they calling this thing. It turns out that they never called it Innocence of Muslims until much later, and it itself, even the producer himself, did not give it that title. And it wasn't until later, again, they had a working title, and it was called something like, Oh, I think it may have been called Innocence of Bin Laden, I believe, originally. But so right away we have a problem of even knowing which video are they even talking about. So it just turns out that in my investigation, it was obvious that that video was part of a massive cover-up of what happened in Benghazi, and to account for a lot of that uprising, which it just did not have. And there have been a lot of statements from people who have said, who were either boots on the ground in the area, or who were people from the Middle East who were, in a position to understand what the sentiment was. And they said point blank that no, that video, we don't know about that video, and it has nothing to do with any of what's happening here. So the connections there between Terry Jones and that, and the fact that Michael was digging into Terry Jones, and I don't know how much further he got, or how much more persistent he may have been. But one thing I will note is that when I went back to find, when I was doing this research, I went back to look at, so I remember having seen these videos, and I thought, another weird thing about Michael Cravey is his YouTube channel is still online. People can go right now to YouTube and search for Thomas Brinkley, and they will find his YouTube account. And if you dig through the videos and try to find the two videos in which he meets with the pastor Terry Jones, or rather he attempts to meet with Terry Jones, both of those videos are not in his video lineup. But somebody who had seen the videos earlier, as I had copied those links, and those links were still active. But what has happened is the videos have been switched from being publicly available to being unlisted videos. So those are available, and you can get to them, but you have to have the link. And so I was able to find the link that way. So I was, first of all, I was amazed that I even thought to look into that. It would have been more likely I would have just completely missed it, because I looked through all of them. I thought, well, he must have taken them offline, and they're gone. We'll never see them again. But in fact, they were there just as unlisted videos. Surprise, surprise. So who's running his account still? And who, in fact, would have made those two videos in particular unlisted? And there may be others, but I couldn't determine what those others might be. But I found that also very unusual.
So, is your suspicion that either he kind of fumbled into some operation and maybe threatened to expose it, or he presented a threat to this operation, or he was picked for some sort of psyop because of his, investigation and.
Well, I would say that if, depending upon if I'm right on either of these accounts, it could have been either case, Tim. I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't even know if he was ever seen as a threat, or if these events, what he came to know about Aurora, what he then came to know about Benghazi. I will say something else about that was another interesting thing, and he seemed to be certain about this. And I only learned about this through a video that when I went back through all of his videos. There's one in particular, and this one is a publicly available one. And what it does is it says it's about a shooting that took place at a spa that I believe was in, I think, Minnesota. There was a spa shooting there. And but this was after the Sikh temple shooting. And what Michael was saying is that, and I don't recall what the evidence was that led him to even in this direction at all, but he appeared to be saying that one of the shooters involved in the Sikh temple, of which he believed there were four shooters there, involved in an operation of some kind. They came in, they were, I believe people who were witnesses there all said that there was a very clearly organized group of four individuals, and yet they want to tell us it was this one guy, right? It was just a lone nut, as usual. But they said that, there were four people coming in what looked like special ops gear and all of that. But that Michael believes one of those individuals was identified by one of the victims of the Sikh temple shooting that may have, so, indicating that there may have been some validity to that having been a real shooting event and somebody actually dying. And they said that as part of retribution, they went to target that individual, and that person was in Minnesota. and in some way they were connected to that spa, or that's somehow just where this event took place in which that person was probably killed. But that, according to what Michaels was thinking, that it was such a surprise to the system that, and it was so damaging, I think, to their overall. In other words, they couldn't come up with a way to explain the event. So they literally had to invent an entirely new script and just overlay it, in which it was some disgruntled ex-husband went and killed his ex-wife there and shot a bunch of other people before killing himself. And one of the reasons that led him to this, I think, also was just because they went on this manhunt for the guy who was the shooter, and yet he was actually there at the spa in one of the rooms there. He had killed himself apparently, and they didn't find him there for like 4 hours. They had swept through the place like 3 or 4 times, and yet they didn't find him. They were still looking for him, and they claimed that he had been there the whole time. Now, another reason why I suspect that the events described there were not as they depicted was that one of the witnesses makes a statement relating to what she, or rather what they saw, the woman who was at the front desk say to this man who came in. She said that something like, oh no, she said that I saw the man come in and I saw him holding the revolver. Okay, and that's something that a witness said about witnessing the shooter, and yet, of course, in the official documents, you find that he did not have a revolver, and I find it very unusual that somebody would say revolver,
Yeah,
if they didn't see a revolver.
they say a gun or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So it just does not add up, and it's a completely, side point here. It's another angle in which Michael, shows that he has a very different approach to looking at these events, and could have just got himself on the radar for any one of these findings, regardless of whether they were concerned very much about how he might, pose a threat to them with that knowledge. It just definitely would have come up on the radar. And then, yeah, from that point, he could have been involved in a psychological operation to either, for whatever purpose, but eventually then leading to this event, which I think is largely where he dies. I think it was largely cooked up. It appears that this was an operation of some kind, because it just doesn't seem to add up when you look at the facts.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no reason why he would then charge the police officer with a hatchet.
No, why would he do that? He's never been a violent person in his life.
Not suicidal. There's no reason to be suicidal.
That's a suicidal act.
Yeah, it's death by cop, and that doesn't. And of course, there's no. That's what witnesses say happened. There's no.
There are only very few witnesses to any of the events at that shopping center. And some have claimed that they were able to, in the short time between when he had this accident there in the road and made his way on foot into the shopping center, and the time that he comes out and gets gunned down, that they were able to already have blocked off the whole, like a square mile of the area. Mm-hmm. Which I find, if that were the case, that would indicate some foreknowledge there. That's just virtually impossible to do. And it wouldn't have been necessary, probably. But there were a couple people that were there. Oh, and they also put out a word from the very get-go. From one of the very first reports, says police are looking for a witness to this crime who was driving a boxy sedan. I don't even know if they identified the color, and that was it. And they said this person should contact the Gainesville police at this number. And at any of the forums online, of course, everyone's comments were, boy, I hope that person, if they do exist, they do not call the Gainesville police. Mm-hmm. So we don't know what that's about, but it may have been a person who was witness to this that was not supposed to witness it. Or it could have been somebody to whom Michael tossed his iPhone or something and said, here, there's a video on here that needs to be seen. My theory is that Michael would have tried, after not being able to make any calls on his phone, he would have turned the camera on himself and started talking and saying, here's what's going on, guys. Yeah. That's my theory. And so the phone being missing says a lot about, relates to this, in that it's either it did turn up missing and they couldn't find it, for whatever. Maybe he did toss it to someone in a boxy sedan, or they found it and said, "No way are we going to let this thing into evidence for
And
whatever reason."
the fact that his mother and his brother both called him, he didn't seem agitated or bothered and surprised that he seemed
No, he
completely
didn't.
unaware that he was he was being chased by the police.
No, and I will add one thing in relation to the news reports that were, I think, the very next day or the following day, so maybe 2 days at most after the event. There's another report in the paper describing what's happened and going into greater detail, and they have some statements from the family, one of which was from the mother, or a few statements from her. And so she first says that he was restless the night before. Okay, so we get that, which is, it's not. It's like, look, are you going to set your son? He's already dead. So do we want to? I mean, most parents, I think, would not go out of their way to portray him as someone who had lost his mind or something. And I'm not saying that would have, but it didn't sit right when I was reading it. But it got worse when they went to ask her about the hatchet. And she said, I had purchased him a hatchet for clearing some brush in the backyard recently. Okay. So now we have the connection between the hatchet and Michael by way of the mother describing how. Now, to me, when I read it, the first thing I thought is, oh man, they just added this statement. They literally, probably was in the police report. If I recall reading it, I think it is in there, these statements, and it made it into the news. But I find that it seems like they would have probably just added it. And I can't imagine what you would do if you were a private citizen, the mother here in this situation, how you would have a voice. Would you dare speak up to say that I never said that? I just don't know. So I could be nuts. It could be that he did, but that she did say it. But if she did, I find it very unusual that it just so happens that she would buy him a hatchet to clear brush in the backyard in the first place,
Yeah, it's an odd detail, or I
It
just
is.
happened to buy him a hatchet.
Yeah. Yeah. It all ties together, right? We're supposed to see it. Oh, look, it all makes sense. And that's how these shills on the internet really operate. They love to take all these points and say the very mother, his own mother says she bought him the hatchet. This is the way they operate, is kind of using these as the foundation of the arguments they make. But they're always the most, even if they're ridiculous points like this one. And the rest of it, they just dismiss. They always overlook the most bizarre aspects, like him not knowing. Like, would he feel that he had to lie to his brother? I mean, look, if he got involved in this stabbing and was in a car chase with police, and then his younger brother calls, would he have lied to his younger brother about it and claim ignorance of this? I doubt it. I doubt it.
And this again, there's just no motive. It's this. It seems like they're trying to create this meme that if you are a conspiracy theorist, investigator, of that type, that you're at any moment you can go off. You're crazy, and
Yeah.
you're a threat. You're a terrorist, or psychotic or something.
Well, I tell
You
people
know.
that I see this as a case of, if you don't like, how I would summarize this is, it was the case of the first internet conspiracy theorist to lose his mind and go on a killing spree.
Yeah.
And which would make sense if they wanted to create that the impression. And it feels like they're looking at mental health as part of the story here as they go forward with things like the gun control.
Yeah. It's a
You know,
it's a end run around the Second Amendment. Whereas you
absolutely.
can have the Second Amendment if you're not crazy. Then we'll determine if you're crazy or not.
Well, it also is
Yeah.
about it's about all of your rights,
Hmm.
because obviously you're going to, when people get you put in a loony bin even for just evaluation for a few days. Well, that's, you're being imprisoned.
Hmm.
So and it may have no basis in fact, or in that you've not committed any crimes. It's just another way in which they can kind of pull back on any of these supposed rights we have. You
Yeah,
know?
involuntary commitment, which
Yeah.
a few years ago we had a case in Virginia where someone who was involuntary committed just for some There's Facebook postings regarding, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, yeah, I remember reading about
Yeah,
that. There were a few of these cases actually.
and they came and enforced, and they came and they coaxed
Well,
him out of his house.
there was a woman in New York who apparently was playing her music too loud, and
Brendan Robb was his name, I think. So, yeah.
well, the woman, I don't remember her name, but she got, listen to this. She was pulled over, and didn't believe her when she said, "I work for the government. I'm like, she was like an attorney for the government or something." She also said that they asked her about the vehicle. She had a nice, like a late model BMW. They just weren't buying her story, so they arrested her, took her in, and made statements to her that made it sound like, "Oh yeah, 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 we believe you. We figured it all out. We were sorry." And then boom, they came in and put her into shackles and took her off to like she just wanted to be taken back to her vehicle, and they were telling her, "Yeah, we're just taking you to her car." But instead, they took her to the local mental institution and institutionalized her for 9 days, in which every day they would be giving her massive doses of, whatever it is they, gosh, I can't remember the names of the drugs themselves, but, what you would expect for somebody who was psychotic, who was potentially violent or a threat to themselves. They drugged her up and took 9 days, and finally they just released her.
And no
With no
accountability.
explanation, none at all. And she's suing them now, but it's going to be a long process, and the word is, probably not going to get out for a while, and very little. It might just come out in a trickle here and there. I only heard it by chance. A friend came across it, and it was insane. They didn't believe her that this was who she was. She says, "I work for the state. I have this, I'm a lawyer. This is my car." They didn't believe any of it. It was just insane, and they thought she was crazy. Well, at least that's what they told her,
Mm-hmm.
or it appears that way. So very unusual stuff going on with that. But yes, I feel that this Michael Cravey incident is still a mystery in many ways. We don't have any, another point needs to be made for those who are not aware of all of this. It turns out, so on the day of this event, we have some news reports going up locally where there's the police, the spokesman for the department, and his name was Tobias. I forget his first name, but something Tobias. And you see him in virtually every one of these, brief news stories in which they're covering the incident. And they're on site. They're at the shopping center in front of the Best Buy. And so throughout the day, you see maybe 5 or 6 of these reports on various stations locally. Never went national, really, but except for just a brief mention. But so these video reports, they show this Tobias character telling about this and that, describing it as the perpetrator. And so it turns out later on, some intrepid, private investigative type person, an independent researcher like myself, I would hope, they find that one of Michael's younger brothers, the one who made the video that came out later, the 2 short videos in which he was asking for, some points from the public to help solve, to figure out what happened. It turns out this guy was working as a videographer and producer with the local Gainesville Police Department. In fact, the police department there in Gainesville produces a monthly, like, cop beat type program. And it's very polished. It's about a half-hour long program. It's done every month. And all they did, what they showed me, they said, "Look at this and look at the end and just watch the credits at the end." It gets to the end of it and it says produced by, and it shows the brother's name and this Tobias character, the spokesperson guy. They were the co-producers of the monthly cop beat for the Gainesville Police Department, and had been for quite a while and continued to be afterward. What do you think about that? Now we got the brother working with the police department, the ones who were essentially the ones who killed his brother. And no mention of that. Nothing comes out through him or from the family in reference to that. And they didn't seem to be trying to hide the fact. I mean, this was somebody was able to find this. Very unusual. And that did kind of lead me, and that might be why it is that I haven't heard from this brother even in an email, just to say, I appreciate that you have interest in,
Hmm.
anything you've done. Nothing. It may be because of this work he's done with personally with this Gainesville Police Department. And it also does make it seem a little unusual that this Tobias guy, I don't know what you would do in this situation, but he certainly does not speak as if he knows who this person is, the victim or the perpetrator, rather, right? The perpetrator, Michael Cravey, I mean, he was intimately familiar with his brother because they were co-producers of a monthly program.
Yeah.
How could you not know that this was the brother? Obviously, he knew him, but he does not allude to that at all in those interviews. He just speaks very coldly and, totally distantly. Very interesting
It's
point
just,
to also think about.
yeah, it's a very strange connection.
It is. I don't know what to make of that, but it does raise, it raised an eyebrow with me. It did make me wonder that, look, if Michael wasn't involved personally in this operation, in which maybe and there's always the possibility, hell, the guy who called me to tell me, another friend of Michael's, the guy who called me the very day of to tell me that Michael was dead. A few days later, we talked and he said, I can't help but think I got the feeling that Michael isn't dead. And I had the feeling too. And I said, yeah, but I go, you know what? How often does this happen? So isn't this maybe just another part of the process of dealing with this type of thing? And we both agreed that, well, yeah, there's really no real signs that point to him still being alive.
Hmm.
But, that's a feeling we had. And it was worth at least us sharing that with each other. But if in fact was the case that Michael was somehow involved in this, this media, hoax or something, and maybe is still alive or something, then it would make sense in a way if his brother were working with the police department. But if he wasn't, then it points to potentially the brother having awareness of this, or maybe working with a criminal a very corrupt department there who may have been involved in this operation and knows the discrepancies between reality and what they're telling us officially, and continues to work with him and has no problem with that, which is pretty, I guess, almost psychopathic, or certainly not
Yeah,
certainly antisocial behavior.
it is strange. I mean, but it's interesting again the fact that you point out that that area is home to a Air Force military program regarding the manipulation of social media.
And
And
that's just one.
that's just one. That's some sort of psychological warfare operation going on there, and also surveillance, but also psychological warfare, and that would blend perfectly into what he was experiencing in the months or weeks leading up to this alleged incident.
Absolutely, absolutely.
To get into these things, it's hard. It really are you're in a maze, and who at what level you don't know who the agents are, who the assets are, witting or unwitting. They can be manipulated, and it's hard to that the connection with the videotape is interesting. 'Cause that kind of reminds me of the a detail in the Columbine case, the shooting at the Columbine High School in Littleton, where the uh, lead FBI investigator, I think his name was Fuselier.
Hmm. Hmm.
His two sons were involved with the Treachercunt Mafia.
Hmm.
One of them helped produce the videotape, and one of them supposedly witnessed the shooting in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And he's the lead FBI investigator in the case, which would seems to me to be a conflict of interest.
Yeah, well, there were actually a number of apparent conflicts of interest in
Yeah.
that case, that's for sure. And yeah, yeah, and the video that they claim, well, that was made between with this Fusilier person's son and the two purported Columbine shooters, Eric and Dylan, and I believe a couple other individuals. That is on record. I mean, we've seen that. That's been in the
Hmm.
public sphere, and it's from a bit earlier, and it is, it's got some violent imagery, and so there's that. But see, today, they also have what's called the Columbine tapes, which was apparently like their documenting of their intent to blow up the school and kill a bunch of people. But they won't release that, and now they claim to have destroyed that. material. And for years, it was a point of contention, please release these tapes, which they claim to have showed to one reporter, and they have shown to the families and all of this. And then the families started coming out advocating for it not to be seen. They talk about it being a, well, what I'm getting at is that what they then do in the on social media and in various places where you get into a debate on this issue, they'll say, "Oh, well, we have seen it. It was violent. It was," and all they're doing is describing that one video that you mentioned was, created by them and this FBI agent's son. So it's just kind of a nice way for them to just misdirect us from the fact that no, 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 no. We have the apparent transcription of the so-called Columbine tapes, which I think are just invented.
Yeah, there's no.
But it's not like they really existed, and because some of the stuff they say in there it does not comport with reality, and seems to not be the right seems to. They speak very glowingly and lovingly of law enforcement in those transcripts, and that sure as hell does not fit with the evidence when we look at the rest of what we have.
And they themselves are under psychiatric care with drugs, and I think one of them at least was a military family, right?
Yes.
They were at Plattsburgh base or something.
He had lived all over the place too.
Yeah.
He was one of these guys who had been a military brat son who had lived from one base to the next, and had said to other people early in his life, this is Eric Harris, had said that he thought that when he was younger, or that he stated point blank, I was taken and drugged and under some kind of program, some kind of MK Ultra like program.
Well,
his own words.
It's one of those things where it sounds odd if you don't look into it, but look into that type of experimenting was rampant. It probably is rampant, particularly with military families.
Yeah, and it's frightening to think about people growing up in families in which there's no love.
That's kind of like the intergenerational pedophile ring, things like that. So it's
the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where what is love to these people? They seem in a lot of ways on the outside looking in, it may look like you have a normal family. But it's hard for me to really understand that because of thinking what we even know about some of these cases with some families, where they clearly did not have a real love of their own children that they're raising in these homes, and some of them have just pawned them off on, for military use. Very unusual to think this goes on, but I do have to suspect it does go on, and it appears that we have evidence in some cases that it does. But I'm also cautious, and I'm very reserved and try not to fall into a trap where, like some of these individuals that have come out and they're more famous for being, claiming to have been victims of mind control programs or have been programmed sex kittens and all of this. And it's difficult to know which ones are legit or how many of these people may still be suffering psychological issues and not able to reveal what was really going on and telling a story that was maybe even programmed into them. It's hard to say.
And they're immediately, and as the stories sound crazy, they're immediately discredited.
Oh yeah, well they're discredited. I mean, there's no legitimacy at all in the general public mind. This stuff is just, as soon as anything gets weird, boom, it's immediately conspiratorial stuff that's obviously wrong and ridiculous, and no need to pay any further attention to. So. But that's changing. There's a subtle, very slow-moving change, I think, a shift. Even if people aren't willing to admit it, I think they're paying closer attention and not dismissing these people so quickly.
But we do know from MK Ultra that children were specifically targeted for particular reasons, because when it comes to trauma-based mind control, they make the best test subjects because they don't have the life experience to cope with it. And it's one of how you traumatize someone and create that sort of shattering.
And it has to do with the development of the developmental stages of human growth. Yeah, absolutely. And what's changed about that, by the way? Nothing. So in other words, we have no reason to suspect that there's any less interest in that area now, because it's still going to be true that children are going to be easier to control in that way. And, all of that work they did is not probably just tucked away to, it hasn't been disappeared. So,
And the military provides a good stable of children. And you have, people who follow the chain of command anyway, and you probably among those people you probably have a percentage that are willing to do this. That might be why operations like at the Presidio,
yeah.
where the daycare center was utilized for not just probably not just satisfying the perverted desires of a few deviants, but it's an operational program going on there. It involves blackmail, intelligence, human trafficking, these things, and
Yeah.
people being used as couriers.
Yeah.
And there's some speculation that's what occurred to Kurt Cobain's widow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
She was at this Presidio.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah,
But,
and she
yeah.
experienced. She apparently was escorted by a CIA group when she was like a teenager. She was escorted around like in Europe.
She was dating one, I
Yeah, like a
believe.
grown man, a
Yeah,
CIA.
grown CIA guy. She was 15 at the time
Yeah,
or
like
something.
15, and apparently she
Yeah.
was a prostitute, drug courier,
Yep.
servicing various military brass, things like that.
Hmm.
That's the I think that's what John Potash says. Is it John Potash and his book about drugs used as a weapon used against us or something? He's a new book.
I think that is it.
John Potash, is his name. Yeah.
Potash. Yeah, there you go. Well,
Uh,
have you done a show on Michael Aquino before?
I've mentioned he's come up a number of things because that gets into the Phoenix program. It gets into the
Yeah.
psychological warfare.
You
He's
might
written.
want to do one
Yeah.
on him. Certainly there's no, and he's come out in recent months. Certainly within the last year, he made an attempt to came out and talked to Sean. What's his name?
John Stone.
Yes, Sean Stone, and
Buzzsaw. Yeah.
yeah, did that interview and that kind of stuff. And I reached out to him because I thought I came across what I believed was his account on YouTube, and
Yeah.
it apparently was him. And I would say luckily, I didn't pursue it any further, but I was of the mind that I'd like to interview the guy, but
But
it was
characters
said to me not to do it.
But characters like Aquino, they kind of link the world of whether it's the occult and Satan worship to intelligence, like Aleister Crowley, things like that. You realize that there's a link between us because it's all about secreted knowledge and manipulation and magic with a K and
Yep.
creating illusions and just lying people and also creating I guess the moral construct or the amoral construct where you can pretty much are given do what thou wilt as Aleister Crowley
Yeah.
said.
And how much of it is also disinformation intended to redirect us from what's going on, which is part of the problem always, is just knowing what's true. So if something sounds outlandish, it sometimes is true. Other times, though, it's a part of their disinfo campaign. Some people really firmly believe that the Satanist aspect of a lot of these operations is not true, that it is part of the misdirection of these horrible crimes that are occurring, but they just don't happen to be based around satanic cult activity.
Yeah, but it's a one way that the intelligence agencies can keep these groups at an arm's length. I mean, they can do their deeds, whether it's drug trafficking, human trafficking, and they can get the job done. But I think ultimately, I don't know if these groups are just are again, it's the way the intelligence agencies keep at arm's length, and these groups are just assets. But ultimately, I do think there's some sort of spiritual connection between these folks because they're all evil. Another character is Anton LaVey, who had connection to the San Francisco police, but before he started his career, and
Oh yeah,
so it's just another connection, So, but anyway, I guess interesting case regarding your friend there. It's
sure.
obviously a lot of questions, which I don't think ever be answered satisfactorily. Because I don't think the authorities are even interested in really investigating these things.
Yeah.
But it is just one of these. If you look at some of these other cases with gang stalking and harassment that occurs with people that seem to go off and on a shooting rampage, it seems to follow these threads.
Yeah.
A lot of a lot there left unanswered. So listen, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. We
Sure.
covered a lot. This again, I've listened to this case. It is strange. Nothing seems to add up. But then what else is new, right?
Well, we're making headway. I mean, every
Yeah.
time we talk about it, we kind of learn a little more, and also we open the door to people out there listening who might want to touch base, who might have some information that would be
Mhm.
helpful, and I encourage them to do it.
Sure thing. Okay, so Peter Klein, Independent Media Solidarity. Your blog is Terror News Network.
It's Tyranny News
I'm
Network.
sorry,
Yeah,
Tyranny.
no
Tyranny.
problem.
Tyranny is late. Tyranny News Network.
That's right.
There you go to YouTube and you have a whole bunch of videos you can watch covering various events and issues. Um, so you can go there and check out Tyranny News Network.
Yep.
Okay, listen, well, thank you for coming on again tonight and
Thank you, Tim.
going to these things. Maybe again, maybe a few weeks from now we'll have you back on. We'll talk about some other weird occurrence or weird situation.
Yeah, there's plenty out there.
I know, enough to talk about for a long time, unfortunately. Well,
Indeed.
thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, Tim.
Bye bye.